Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking Arthas. We are talking Tyrande and Elune and Uther and the Forsworn and Dreadlords and Thrall and a whole lot more. Because today, Internet, we are talking the Lore-gasms of Shadowlands, patch 9.1, Chains of Domination. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hold up, what exactly is a Lore-gasm, pray tell? Is this some new category on Twitch that I haven't heard of? Is it when Josh gets a little too excited playing as Shaman? And no, unfortunately, it's not that. Let me clarify. The official scientific definition of a Lore-gasm is the reveal of world building or story points which upon hearing makes you go... So for example, Vader saying, "I am your father." Lore-gasm! The Emperor saying, "I am your grandfather." Not a Lore-gasm. Absolute opposite of a Lore-gasm. Flaccid, ruined lore boners all round. And in fairness, Shadowlands in general has been way more full of Vader-gasms than Pauper shrivels so far, with 9.1 looking to continue the trend in a big way, with some massive characters, hot lore reveals, tantalizing filling in of big mysteries, and laying some serious groundwork for possibly the biggest and longest redemption arc in Warcraft history. And we're going to talk about all of them. So obviously this video is going to ruin bits of the 9.1 story campaign, worse than Season 8 ruined Game of Thrones. There's your warning. Now join us as we present, in no particular order, the top 10 awesomest Lore-gasms coming up in Shadowlands, Chains of Domination. Okay, go, 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 go. The first point on this list is a reveal so huge, so earth-shattering, so mind-blowing and unexpected that I'm genuinely scared it's going to hospitalize some of you before we even get started properly. So please, if you're not already sitting down, sit down. If you're on heart medication, take it, because it turns out that the Primus, the Eternal One in charge of Maldraxxus, who has been missing in action since long before we ever rocked up in the afterlife, talking to us in pre-recorded messages through his creepy statue, and whose location has been the subject of intense speculation and debate all expansion long, well, the much anticipated answer to this riddle unveiled in 9.1 turns out to be something so shocking, so left field, so game-changing and earth-shattering that no, it's the Rune Carver. The Primus is the Rune Carver, or rather, the Rune Carver is the Primus, which is, it's kind of the worst kept secret since Philip Schofield's private life, in fairness. The suspiciously masked leader of Maldraxxus, which is the covenant that specializes at being awesome at carving runes, disappears. And around the same time, we discover a suspiciously masked prisoner in Torghast with no memory, who the jailer obviously places great importance in because of his awesome skill at rune carving. And also his name is the Rune Carver. Oh, and also the Rune Carver has the same voice actor as the Primus. It's not exactly the usual suspects, you know. But Taliesin, what about the fingers on his statue? They don't match the fingers on the Rune Carver. And that's true, but it's also true that the strong heroic figure presented here doesn't quite represent the shriveled prune Santa that the Primus actually looks like, especially accurately either. I guess what we've learned here is the denizens of Maldraxxus are really good at fighting and making swords, but shit at statues. So it turns out the entire reason that the jailer has pulled the new area, Korthia, into the moor is because it's where the Primus hid his sigil, all 5 of which will allow him to escape the moor somehow, and 3 of which he already has. Once we work this motivation out, we break into the Chamber of Secrets and recover it, and then think to ourselves, what should we do with this? Oh, that Rune Carver dude is pretty good with stuff like this. Maybe he'll help us get all the memories out of it or something. So we take the sigil to the Rune Carver, and he's all like, "No, what have you done, you absolute morons?" And in fairness, he does have a point. He hid his sigil in the vault, and we just waltz in, break it out of the safe, and then literally take it to the jailer's house, where obviously the jailer pops in from upstairs and takes the sigil off us. And yeah, we're absolute morons. But yeah, the headline here is that the Rune Carver was the Primus all along. I know. I promise they get better from here. Tyrande Whisperwind's arc is one that has been building dramatically since the BFA pre-patch, and after seeing her home city burn down and her people raised as forsaken, embracing the vengeful power of the Night Warrior and becoming consumed by her lust for revenge, killing the Thanos, going it alone in the afterlife, and rescuing the souls of her people from Torghast, her current path reaches something of a resolution in 9.1. She first turns up in the Battle of Ardenweald opening scenario where, and this is the joy of cinematic less PTRs, right, but she appears appears to save us from some kind of big maw monster before collapsing and being taken into the care of the Winter Queen and her leafy friends. Now, if you've played the Ardenweald Covenant campaign, you know that Huln High Mountain was on the search for other past Night Warriors who we think might be able to rid her of the power which is consuming her. And in 9.1, with those past Night Warriors all gathered, the ritual is performed. And don't worry, because there are another 2 Lore-gasms in this ceremony alone, which we'll be coming to next. But Tyrande is released from the Night Warrior's grasp by Elune herself. Now, this is another one where, honestly, until the cinematic arrives with the patch, we can only guess at the details of, but the dialogue afterwards certainly makes it sound like Elune speaks to the gathered crowd, which makes sense considering there are no less than 4 Night Warriors and her sister in attendance. I know, it's coming next, I promise. Now, the question is, what form does this speech take? Does Elune physically appear and say hi? Like, do we see Elune? Seems unlikely, but not impossible. Does her voice bellow out around the trees of the grove and we hear what she sounds like for the first time? Maybe? Does she speak through Tyrande, using the Night Elf as an avatar? This would seem the most likely option, but either way, it will represent our first direct and tangible contact with Elune in the history of the game, and is a massive big deal just by itself. And by the end of it all, Tyrande has been returned to us, free of the power of the Night Warrior, and with it seems, her overpowering need for revenge against Sylvanas. And this is fitting. Tyrande's story through the last 2 expansions has always been a pretty heavy-handed metaphor for how vengeance can consume you, so it feels like any happy ending for her had to be more about giving up her quest for revenge rather than kill-stealing Sylvanas at the end of the raid. When she talks with Shadris at the close of the story, she speaks of the future of her people, and the thought of Tyrande's focus being on rebuilding with the Night Elves rather than destroying those responsible is a comforting one to me, at least. And yeah, also a pretty big reveal in this Ardenweald scene is that the Winter Queen's sister is revealed categorically to be Elune. Now, this is another of the mysteries that players have been discussing since the Ardenweald leveling campaign teased us with the Winter Queen referring to Ysera as my sister's pet, with the identity of said sister sparking fierce speculation for not just who it could be, but what that would mean for what the Eternal Ones actually even are, and how and why the Shadowlands was ever created. And I've got to admit that as far as potential candidates for the Winter Queen's sister, I was firmly in the Eonar camp, the Titan of Life being the one who had imbued the dragon aspects with their power, and having such a strong connection to the Emerald Dream, essentially Ardenweald's sister existence. She definitely seemed to most neatly fit the description of someone who might refer to Ysera as her pet, and also who the Winter Queen might refer to as sister. But no, that is apparently not the case, and the Winter Queen leaves us in no doubt that Elune was the gal all along. Again, I'm kind of hoping that missing cinematic is going to fill us in with a few more details, because at the moment it's very difficult to know what to make of this information. Does this mean that Elune is also an Eternal One? The word sister doesn't really have the same literal meaning when applied to cosmic fantasy beings as it would for mortal humans, so Elune could be a First One, or a Titan, or something completely different. She could even be Eonar, or Eonar could be a third sister in this little group, who knows? What is certain is that the Winter Queen thought her sister Elune had abandoned her, much like the Night Elves did, and her return in this scene makes everyone very happy indeed. Bring on that cinematic! Okay, so this might not be quite on the same level as the Tyrande resolution or the Elune reveal that we get in this pretty jam-packed Ardenweald chapter, but it's incredibly interesting nonetheless, and it involves one of those past Night Warrior souls that we gather to help in Tyrande's ritual, the Stone Rite from Revendreth. So the Stone Rite is in general a bit of a badass. As well as being a Night Warrior in life, in death she became the Harvester of Wrath, and created the Stoneborn to repel an invasion by the forces of the light aeons ago, and was the only one of the Harvesters that hadn't yet joined Renathal and his bitey rebel boys in Simfall at the start of this patch, mostly because Renathal is clearly pretty scared of her. What's really interesting about the Stone Rite, though, is who she isn't. In Sinfall, all throughout patch 9.0, there was a post-it note on the Harvester of Wrath's stone, which described the Stone Rite as one of the first Venthyr, not made from a soul, but willed into being by Denathrius himself, which, if you've been paying attention, doesn't fit connect with what I just told you about the Stone Rite, who obviously was a living soul, a Night Warrior wielding badass of a soul before becoming a Venthyr. In 9.1, there is further clarification on this, as the curator has added a second note correcting Renathal's mistake. You are confusing the Stone Rite with the original Harvester of Wrath. She still exists, but had her power stripped from her and given to the Stone Rite long ago. If memory serves, the Stone Rite was the first Venthyr forged of a mortal soul to assume the role of Venthyr. So another badass point for the Stone Rite there, but also, what about the original Harvester of Wrath? If she still exists, who is she? Where is she? Why did she have her power taken away? And what might she be up to? Living her best powerless afterlife in the sunny climes of the Ember Ward with no Harvester responsibilities weighing her down? Or plotting some hideous, bitter revenge? Maybe we'll never find out. Or maybe we will. And maybe it'll have something to do with our old friends. Chains of Domination doesn't just give us the return of the Nathrazim, aka the uninvited guests, aka the Dreadlords, it also basically gives us the origin story of one of my favourite group of Warcraft baddies, and raises a lot of questions as to their role in the story going forward. After some very shirtless Dread dudes make an appearance in an early Korthia quest, the Primus sends us to Revendreth to get help from Renathal, and in doing so, we get a lore bomb of titanic proportions. The Dreadlords, it turns out, were created in the Shadowlands by Denathrius as the Covenant's espionage unit, spreading out across the cosmos and reporting back to Daddy D on the forces of the Void, Light, Fel, and everything in between, until their spies were uncovered by the forces of the Light, and the subsequent retaliatory attacks are what created the Ember Ward, it being the part of the zone which the Nathrazim called home, which suggests, by the way, that the armies of the Light may have been only attacking the Nathrazim rather than the Shadowlands or even Revendreth as a whole. The Stone Rite Stoneborn helped quash that invasion, and Denathrius supposedly banished the Dreadlords to what we now know was a planet in the twisting nether that they called Nathreza. But it turns out he totally kept in touch with them and used them to help with his plans to free the jailer. The revelation that Dreadlords have Revendreth connections may not be especially surprising in itself. Denathrius looks like a Dreadlord and is called the Lord of Dread, and there's the enemy infiltration scouting report that is found in the Spire of the Unseen Guest. But to have their whole unknown history laid out so explicitly is a total lore-gasm, not least in the way that it makes us re-evaluate events in Warcraft history. Because if the Nathrazim have been serving Denathrius, and by extension the Jailer, all along, well, what does that mean for the Dreadlords that told Sargeras about the Void Lords and helped him in the Burning Legion? What does it mean for our glorious Lighty Boy Lothraxion? What does it mean for the Lich King, since it was the Nathrazim who supplied all the gear for Kil'jaeden? Could it mean that we might head to the remains of Nathreza in a future patch? The possibilities are endless, and the only thing certain is that we will be seeing a whole lot more of the Nathrazim and Sire Denathrius, who by the way they totally rescued, as they look to play an integral part in the story of not just Shadowlands, but just about everything in the immediate future of the game. And I for one couldn't be happier, because I love these hoofy dudes. It's the tag team matchup of the century, folks. The buddy comedy you've all been waiting for. The mother-son reunion that has been decades in the making. On the one hand, we have Draka, total awesome badass orc boss who is so mean she stole an Acropolis and didn't even give a shit. She wears armor better than any other orc in the universe. She's an inspirational leader at the top of her game, commanding an army that would follow her to the ends of the afterlife and beyond. On the other hand, there's Thrall, who, well, he cheated in Mok'Gara and threw his axe at Hellier like a muppet. Oh wait, he is good at growing wheat. Oh no, it's shit wheat, I forgot. Okay, fine. So Thrall isn't quite the iconic character that he used to be. And in fairness, he totally knows that too. But he does seem to be getting back in touch with his heroic side recently. And he was so excited to meet his mum in the Shadowlands that he literally went back to Orgrimmar to get his Doomhammer armor specifically for the occasion. All that aside though, it genuinely is touching to see Thrall and Draka adventuring together in 9.1. And the dynamic of Thrall being too scared to tell Draka who he is, but her clearly knowing anyway, because of course she does, because he's her son, is delightful and brings a really satisfying extra dimension to what's a really awesome chapter of high-stakes action anyway. Draka really finding her true place in Maldraxxus might even show Thrall that it's never too late to turn things around and be the best version of yourself. So this might even be the catalyst to a new improved badass again Thrall too, and I think we would all welcome that. One of the major talking points from the Afterlives Bastion cinematic is addressed in 9.1. What exactly happened to Uther's soul when Arthas poked him with Frostmourne? The cinematic shows his soul heading to Bastion, which on the face of it seemed to contradict established lore, which had his soul still in Frostmourne. Keen-eyed viewers notice though that in the cinematic, when Uther is struck down, his soul appears to actually split in two, with one part ending up in the Hungry Sword and the other heading to the Boy Scout Smurflord after party, which didn't just reconcile with past events but also helped explain why Uther was so troubled and basically a bit of a dick in that cinematic, because his soul was literally not complete. This was later confirmed to be the case in a Steve Danusa interview, and Chains of Domination goes even further into the matter. When such a weapon is wielded in rage, Thenios explains to us, it can shatter a soul into fragments. If the jailer holds a part of Uther's soul, it cannot be fully mended until the lost piece is restored, which for us means a trip into Torghast to recover the missing fragment of Uther's soul, which is cool enough, but what makes this quest super interesting is when we come across the room where apparently there are fragments of all the souls that Frostmourne devoured during its time with Arthas, such as Tyrannus Menethil, Antonidus, many of the original paladins, and a few forgotten victims. Sorry dudes, you just weren't important enough to give a shit about. All of which you'll be very pleased to learn we totally don't take with us when we leave the Moor, abandoning them to presumably an eternity of imprisonment and suffering, which they definitely don't deserve. Sorry Antonidus, but we were only here for Uther. Maybe see you later, yeah, but probably not though, to be honest, what with us just leaving you here in literal hell and everything. Oh well, bye! But what's even more super cool about this room when you think about it is whose soul isn't here? Because obviously this whole new soul-shattering thing has some very interesting implications for Sylvanas, doesn't it? If it turns out that the Banshee Queen we know somehow isn't complete, and the Sylvanas story in the new Folk and Fairy Tales of Azeroth book certainly suggests that to be the case, and that maybe there's a whole other part of the old Ranger General's being somewhere else to be discovered and potentially restored, well, that would be a pretty useful thing to know, wouldn't it? That might well be the kind of thing that would go some way to explaining the jailer's hold over Sylvanas. That's the kind of thing that could have some pretty massive ramifications down the line, isn't it? We should ask Antonidus if he knows anything about that. Oh, never mind, we left him in hell, I forgot. Don't bother.
Hello everyone! As you'll know if you know us, and you do, you totally know us, we love good stories and good storytelling. So we are delighted to be teaming up with Audible for this video. You already know that Audible has a huge collection of Warcraft stories you can listen to. Lord of the Clans told by Christy Golden? Don't mind if I do. Before the Storm, narrated by Josh Keaton, aka Anduin Wrynn. Yes, absolutely. The upcoming Sylvanas, narrated by Patty Matson. The story of Sylvanas told by Sylvanas herself. Where do I sign? But you might not know about some of Audible's newer features, like Whisper Sync, which lets you effortlessly swap between listening and reading on multiple devices without skipping a beat. Or the new Plus catalog with an unmatched number of audiobooks, guided meditations, sleep aids, no credits required. It's all genuinely super cool, and you can try a month's subscription for free by clicking the link in the description below or going to audible.com/Taliesin Evitel or texting Taliesin Evitel to 500 500. I've been satisfying my cravings for good stories with Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, which is a collection of some of the funniest and weirdest stories I've listened to in a long time. It's got tons of Loki in it, who turns into a female horse and accidentally gets impregnated by a stallion. I mean, we've all been there, right? It's very relatable, is what I'm saying. I liked having Neil Gaiman narrate this to me himself, which was, but if you prefer, you could try out the BBC adaptation narrated by basically the entire cast of Game of Thrones. It's great. So take a whole world of stories with you wherever you go, in any situation.
Evitel, I've just finished a 5-part epic video series on the history of the Tuskarr. Can I read it to you?
Yeah, sure.
It was a dark and stormy night.
What do you want here, Odin?
A drink of water from your well.
Check it all out for free at audible.com/Taliesin Evitel or text Taliesin Evitel to 500 500. Happy listening!
With Uther's soul restored, he sets off on a voyage of confronting his past, which gloriously we join him on and get to enjoy some awesome flashbacks to the creation of the Paladins, the culling of Stratholme, and his eventual fall at Andorol. But in the end, it is coming to terms with his own failings, his regret that he faced Arthas as a foe rather than a mentor being especially important, that allows Uther to start to mend. And this journey proves inspiring to Adrestes, who vows to bring similar self-reflection to the Kyrian and heal the wound with the Forsworn. As Uther puts it, if my soul can be mended, so too can the rift with the Forsworn. And that's basically exactly what they do, through kindness and compassion and understanding, and also beating up a fair amount of the Forsworn in the Temple of Loyalty too. But the pleasing thing about this is that the Kyrian's desire to change is genuine. They tell the Forsworn, as they were beating some of them up, that the Archon has seen the error of her ways, and that going forward, Ascended will have the choice of what memories to keep and which to forget. They renamed the rather 1984 sounding Temple of Loyalty to the Temple of Devotion to create a future we can all be proud of. And things seem to be actually working out between the two factions by the end. Our old pal Nicolon is at the forefront of the new totally chill breed of Forsworn, and all of this means that genuinely the Kyrian are the covenant that do the most actual learning and growing and improving out of all of the other covenants in the story so far. And basically, you're not allowed to call them a cult anymore, okay? They are not even slightly a cult, okay? Maybe it's a bit culty still, I don't know. At the very end of that Kyrian chapter, while everyone is being very pleased with themselves, there's an exchange between Uther and Pelagos, which couldn't be more obviously foreshadowing future events if it was a great number 4 casting a shadow on the scene. Uther, pardon me asking, but what fate befell Arthas in the end? At the moment of his death, Devos and I claimed his soul and cast it into the maw, without the Arbiter's knowledge, so he might yet have had a chance at redemption. I will never know. It was not my choice to make. Devos led me down a dark path. Now that I have seen the more for myself, I cannot say that any soul deserves such torment. Perhaps some can never be forgiven, but you have shown me that they must be treated with compassion, which does seem pretty consistent with the general message of Shadowlands overall, and something that we've discussed before, the idea that one of the greatest crimes the jailer commits is to deny souls their rightful chance in the afterlife. He talks about the injustice of the machinery of death, but it's him that stops souls going to Bastion and Ardenweald and Maldraxxus, but even more importantly, he denies souls that would have gone to Revendreth the chance at atonement that all souls have a right to. Both Sylvanas and Arthas might not be worthy of forgiveness for their actions, but it is still wrong to deny their souls the chance at personal redemption and atonement, which is not the same as a redemption arc. It certainly looks like the jailer's denial of Sylvanas' right to that is going to be important in her story going forward, and this conversation between Uther and Pelagos suggests that it could well be the case for Arthas too. If we were to rescue Arthas from the maw, it needn't be for forgiveness. It needn't be so we can all be best buddies. It would be to give him his rightful chance to go through the Revendreth process and see if he can find atonement himself over maybe thousands of years. And who better to give him that chance than his old mentor, Uther? And at number 1 in this list of 9.1 Lore-gasms are the Lore-gasms yet to come, which at the moment at least aren't on the PTR to be seen, like the ending of the final boss fight in the new raid Sanctum of Domination against Sylvanas. Not only will we find out what happens to the Banshee Queen, but we will find out what happens to the jailer too. Presumably he will finally escape the maw and we'll have to chase him somewhere new. But there's also that final chapter of the Covenant campaign that we haven't seen yet, called What Lies Ahead, which you'd assume might be setting up the action to come in the raid, but which won't be playable until 6 weeks into the patch. So there is just a possibility, depending on when Sanctum of Domination releases, that the action in this chapter takes place after the raid, and is actually much more to do with what happened at the end of it with Sylvanas and the jailer. Maybe that's exactly why Blizz haven't put it on the PTR for us to see yet. But either way, there is a whole lot more lore in 9.1 just waiting to be unleashed. We have basically no idea right now, but you better believe that we'll be here to talk about it as soon as we do. And there we have it, the top 10 Lore-gasms so far of 9.1. And look, we didn't even mention Ner'zhul, or Garrosh, or Kel'Thuzad, or Odin, that dick. Chains of Domination has got shed loads more story and lore coming with it that we've hardly touched on here, with more hitting the PTR all the time. And we would love to hear your opinion on what you've seen so far. Have Blizz learned their lessons from the awkward pacing and story structure that proved such a drag in BFA? Or is the Shadowlands story not quite hitting the mark for you? Are things working out as you'd have hoped? Or is your fave character getting done real dirty like? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make all of our videos happen. And guys, seriously, thank you, because without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Elune. Taliesin. From me and Evitel and the Nyrin too. Until next time, cheerio.